Welcome back to the Halls of History, everyone. I am your host, Scott Hall. Wow, there was a lot to take in from divisional weekend. Of course, an exciting conference championship weekend coming up. Patrick Mahomes getting injured, Chad Henne's incredible drive, and then Mahomes coming back out. The Eagles absolutely dominating the Giants as Jalen Hurts looked great. Kenneth Gainwell and Miles Sanders ran all over the place. Giants just couldn't stop them. And that record-breaking defense with 5 more sacks. Check out my video on what the Eagle defense accomplished this past season. Now, Cincinnati was in control from start to finish against the Bills, showing that the Bungles are looking like a thing of the past, and this squad will be a contender for quite some time. The 49ers and Cowboys was another classic battle between the two storied franchises. Brock Purdy still looks nice and steady. George Kittle is one of the most exciting, one of the most fun players in the league to watch. And that Niners defense, they stepped up to the task of stopping a pretty darn good offense in the Cowboys. Now, let's get to our video for today. If you remember my question at the end of last week's episode, what is the record for the most points scored by one team in the divisional round of the playoffs? And no, it was not broken by Philly's 38 points. The answer, 62 by the 1999 Jacksonville Jaguars over the Miami Dolphins. It was just the 5th season of existence for the team from Duval County. And on January 15th, 2000, the Jags lit up Miami 62-7 in what proved to be the final game in the amazing career of Dan Marino, and the last game coached by Jimmy Johnson in the NFL as well. Hey, the two are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, so they may have been given kind of rather an embarrassing exit, but they are wearing gold jackets. On that sunny day in Jacksonville, the 14-2 Jaguars, the number 1 seed in the AFC, dominated right from the opening drive to the final whistle. Miami defeated the Seattle Seahawks 20-17 in the wild card round to advance. Remember, Seattle used to be in the AFC West. The 2002 season is when the Seahawks flipped conferences over to the NFC with the Houston Texans coming in. Back to the game. A 9-play game-opening drive that covered 73 yards and ended with an 8-yard touchdown pass from Mark Brunell to Jimmy Smith got it all started. And the tidal wave began. The very first pass of the game for Marino, picked off by Aaron Beasley, who had a career year in 1999 with 6 picks for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. With Jacksonville already in Dolphins territory, the Miami defense held tight and forced a 45-yard field goal from Mike Hollis. Jags led 10-0, and not even 5 minutes had passed in the first quarter. Miami went 3 and out on its next drive, and a Tom Hutton punt pinned the Jags at its own 9. Looking good, right? Wrong. Fred Taylor gained 1 yard on the first play and then exploded down the far sideline for a 90-yard touchdown. And how about the speed from Jimmy Smith to catch up and help escort Taylor in? It was and still is the longest rushing play in playoff history. Taylor beat the old mark of 80 yards by Roger Craig for the 49ers against the Vikings after the 1988 season. Players have come close, but they haven't broken it. Jimmy Johnson knew the Dolphins needed to limit the big plays. Well, he's found his team down 17-0 with just over 4.5 minutes to go in the first, and there already had been 2 plays of at least 41 yards plus the pick. And the big plays kept on coming. Miami's very next drive, Marino was sacked by Tony Brackens, who forced the fumble, recovered, and finally finished the trifecta, taking it back 16 yards for another score. Kind of a funny play, as even Brackens really didn't know whether or not he was down by contact. But he got across the goal line. Jags up 24-0. Had there been just a few more seconds in the first, Jacksonville would have added to its lead as the Jaguars scored on a 39-yard touchdown pass from Brunell to Fred Taylor on the first play of the second quarter. Jacksonville's 24-point margin in the first is tied for the second most in playoff history. The Oakland Raiders in 1969 against the Oilers and the Cleveland Browns against the Steelers after the 2020 season had 28-point leads. So the second quarter just got underway, and Marino found himself down 31-0. But it wasn't over. The tidal wave continued, or maybe tsunami, depending on which side you're looking at. The next drive for the Dolphins ended with a blocked punt by Corey Chamblin, and that gave the Jags the ball at Miami's 21. 3 plays later, James Stewart runs it in for a 25-yard touchdown, breaking several tackles, and then for good measure, a 15-yard unsportsmanlike conduct penalty for the shove in the end zone. Frustrations coming through as Jacksonville now led 38-0. After that score, and with the 38-point lead, Jaguars head coach Tom Coughlin pulled Mark Brunell from the game. The lefty was already hobbled with a knee injury, and Jay Fiedler, who ended up playing for the Dolphins the very next season, entered the game. 3 more Miami turnovers in the second quarter doomed any attempts for the Dolphins to try and get back into this game. Beasley had his second interception and third of his playoff career. Marino fumbled again, and Donovan Darius recovered. Then J.J. Johnson put the ball on the ground that was stripped and recovered by Carnell Lake. Now, mercifully enough, not all of those miscues turned into points for the home team. Only the Johnson fumble led to a Mike Hollis 28-yard field goal. Trailing 41-0, Marino did take the Dolphins down the field on a 70-yard drive with under 2 minutes before the half. That was capped off with a 20-yard touchdown strike to Oronde Gadsden. At the half, Jacksonville led 41-7. The 34-point margin was the second largest in playoff history, behind the 1969 Oakland Raiders with a 35-point lead over the Oilers. Oakland won that divisional round contest 56-7. The big plays for Jacksonville rolled right into the second half as Fiedler found Jimmy Smith for a 70-yard score. And a little later, Alvis Whitted for a 38-yard touchdown, both in the third quarter. Hollis hit the extra points, and now the Jaguars were just 1 point away from tying the divisional round points record of 56 set by those 1969 Oakland Raiders. Marino was benched for Damon Huard after the first drive in the third. On to the fourth quarter, and Miami fumbles again at its own 5. Next play, Chris Howard ran right up the middle to set the record. Over the final 10-plus minutes of the game, no more points were scored. And folks, it could have been worse. Think about those 2 other turnovers in the second quarter that didn't result in points. Plus, kicker Mike Hollis actually missed a field goal in the first half. It could have been at least 65. And talk about big plays. Jacksonville's offense had 17 plays that covered at least 10 yards and 8 that went for more than 20. They were a big play offense that season. Not to mention the defense with some big plays of its own as Miami turned the ball over 7 times. 2 interceptions and 5 fumbles, with 1 going for a score, and of course the blocked punt. Brunell went 5 of 9 for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. Fiedler completed 7 of 11 passes for 172 yards and 2 more scores. Fred Taylor ran for 135 yards with, of course, that record-setting 90-yard touchdown. Jimmy Smith had 5 catches for 136 yards and 2 scoring receptions. The Jaguars outgained Miami 520-131. But then again, it is hard to gain yards and score points when you turn it over 7 times. On defense, Beasley had the 2 picks. Darius recovered 2 fumbles, and Gary Walker had 2 of the Jags' 5 sacks. And here's a little nugget for you. Marlos Leroy, a rookie backup defensive tackle, big number 61 out of Georgia, recorded his only career pass defensed sack and forced fumble in the win. He played a grand total of 22 games in the regular season, over 2 years in Jacksonville, the only regular season games of his career, and tallied just 6 tackles. Hey, he had a great playoff game when his name was called, and that's a story he'll be able to tell for the rest of his life. Marino finished 11 of 25 for just 95 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, and 2 fumbles. Not exactly the way to ride off the field for a great like Marino. Hewer didn't fare any better, going 5 of 16 for 46 yards. Stanley Pritchett and Autry Denson led Miami in rushing with just 10 yards each. Jacksonville was eliminated in the AFC Championship game 33-14 by the Tennessee Titans. The Titans went on to fall to the St. Louis Rams by essentially just 1 yard in Super Bowl 34. This game was the first time in the regular season or the playoffs that Jacksonville had scored more than 50 points. The next, and so far the only time, came on December 13th, 2015 in a 51-16 win over the Colts. And despite having a pretty good offense in its early years, the Jaguars have only scored 50 touchdowns in a season just once. 2007, tallying exactly 50. David Garrard and Quinn Gray combined for 28 scoring passes, with Maurice Jones-Drew and Fred Taylor combining for 14 rushing touchdowns. The 50th touchdown that year, a 17-yard strike from Gray to receiver Ernest Wilford in a loss to the Texans. Jacksonville did finish the 2007 season 11-5 and went to the playoffs, beating the Steelers in the wild card round before falling to the Patriots in the divisional. And don't forget, if you like the content here with the Halls of History, remember to click subscribe below and hit that notification button as well. You know I have to dive a little deeper. So here's a brief history of the divisional round of the playoffs. You know I had to do it, folks, right? The first divisional playoff appeared in 1941. It was used as a tiebreaker between the Bears and the Packers, who both finished 10-1 in the West Division. On December 14th, the Bears defeated the Packers 33-14 to advance to the league title game and face the New York Giants, who won the East at 8-3. The high-powered Bears, the first team to score more than 50 touchdowns in a season, dismantled the Giants 37-9. And if you want to learn more about teams scoring 50 or more touchdowns in a single season, check out my previous video. From the first time the divisional playoff was used in 1941 through 1966, the game only appeared if there was a tie among teams at the top of the standings. The divisional playoff came up again in 1943, 1947. Two were needed in 1950, as the Browns and the Giants finished 10-2 in the American Division, while the Rams and Bears were both 9-3 in the National. Cleveland beat New York, and Los Angeles took down Chicago. The Browns then beat the Rams 30-28 in the championship, giving Cleveland the title in its first year in the NFL after 4 years in the All-America Football Conference. And don't forget, that was also their 5th straight title. Whew, man. We see the divisional playoff again in 1952, 57, 58, and 65. Over in the American Football League, same thing. The divisional playoff was used as a tiebreaker and came up in 1963 and again in 1968. The divisional round finally became a regular thing in 1967 as the NFL moved to 4 divisions. The Capital, which featured Dallas, Philadelphia, Washington, and New Orleans. The Century Division with Cleveland, the Giants, St. Louis Cardinals, and Pittsburgh. The Coastal Division, which had Los Angeles, Baltimore, I'm pretty far apart there, San Francisco and Atlanta, so 2 on the West Coast, 2 on the East Coast. And finally, the Central Division, which made absolutely more sense, with Green Bay, Chicago, Detroit, and Minnesota. The AFL still had just 2 divisions, the East and the West, with a total of 9 teams, but they did move to using the divisional round in the playoffs in 1969, the last year before the merger. Now, the NFL expanded to 2 wild card games in 1978, 1 for each conference, then to 4 wild card contests, 2 for each conference in 1990. And now the Super Wild Card round came into effect in 2020 with 3 for each conference and only the number 1 seeds from each side getting the first round bye. In the beginning, there were no more than just 2 divisional playoff games in a season until the merger with the AFL in 1970. That is when we finally see 4 divisional playoff games, and that has stayed the same since. From the very first one in 1941 to this season, there have been a grand total of 231 divisional playoff games. There have only been 5 with a team scoring at least 50 points. And of course, just the one so far from Jacksonville scoring 60 or more. Other than the Jags and then the Raiders in 1969 that had set the previous record at 56 points, the other 50-point scorers, here we go, 1967, Dallas Cowboys with 52 against the Browns, 51 by the 2019 Kansas City Chiefs against the Texans, and 51 by Washington after the 1983 season in a blowout over the Rams. In fact, there have only been 29 divisional games with at least one team scoring 40 points in a game. The only team so far to score at least 40 in a divisional playoff game and lose, the Pittsburgh Steelers lost 45-42 to the Jacksonville Jaguars on January 14th, 2018. Now, you would think that these games wouldn't feature too many high-scoring and especially blowout affairs, as the teams are getting whittled down to the best of the best from that season. Now, yes, you are going to be dealing with some very high-scoring offenses, but at the same time, seeing some incredible defenses as well. And of course, if the weather is bad at an outdoor stadium, there's nothing like the playoffs in the NFL. So I am going to stick with high-scoring playoff games here on the Halls of History. So my next question for you will deal with the conference championship games, since that is what is up next and coming up this weekend. Now, here we go. Which NFL team holds the record for most points scored in a conference championship game? Couple of hints. You have to go back more than 30 years, and it was done by a team that was about to start an unprecedented run of trips to the Super Bowl. Think you know? Drop your guesses in the comments below, as well as any show suggestions that you might have. And of course, enjoy the conference championship games this Sunday. Should be two great games, at least hoping for two great games. It's always the best to see two just tight scoring, unbelievable games in the conference championships. And we have Cincinnati in Kansas City for a rematch of last season's exciting contest, and the 49ers traveling all the way across the country to Philly. Will Mahomes overcome the injury, or can Joe Burrow and the Bengals stay hot? Zach Taylor has his squad playing very well. This will be just the second time that San Fran and Philadelphia have met in the playoffs, and actually the same for Cincinnati and Kansas City. The other game came in the wild card round after the 1996 season. The 49ers won 14-0 at home. Now, a big question for this game, can the 49ers protect Brock Purdy? Philadelphia totaled 70 sacks. Again, both teams are playing really well right now. Now, who do you have going to the Super Bowl? Maybe drop those guesses in the comments below as well. And if you enjoy the show, check out a couple of my other videos right here. And tune in next week to find out the highest scoring team in a conference championship game. Hey, you never know. The answer could actually change. Maybe it might happen this weekend. But you'll find it all right here on the Halls of History. Thanks for watching.